Greetings, folks. My name is Elizabeth Creamer. I'm a faculty member in the School of Education at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, where I teach graduate level courses in both Introduction to Mixed Methods Research and Advanced Mixed Methods Research. This is the second YouTube I've prepared about mixed methods. In this one, I focus on the features of an exemplary mixed method publication and use an example to show you how you can structure your article in a way that is consistent with the overriding logic of mixed methods, which is to really place the emphasis on mixing. You can see from the stack on the left that one of the points I'm trying to make that it's really kind of difficult to find a publication that is exemplary throughout it. It's not so hard to find ones that are good research or examples of good use of mixed methods, but to find one that really emphasizes transparency or methodological reflexivity throughout the research publication is a little bit more difficult to find. I've chosen a publication from one of those that I have used in my book by Catello and her colleagues. Who are from Canada, and they're in the School of Nursing, and they're reporting on the results of a study where they analyze the interactions between victims of domestic violence and caregivers, hospital personnel in emergency room settings. So I want to highlight 7 features of this particular article to help you in constructing your own article from a mixed methods research study. The first point I want to make is the use, or the first strategy I want to recommend is the acknowledgement that it's mixed methods research in the title. That's a fairly easy thing to do. It's a way to connect to an audience that is particularly interested in mixed methods research. It's a way to be transparent. This research is unusual in one way that's reflected in this title. It mixes in a lot of ways. It qualifies for what I call fully integrated mixed methods research, but it also mixes methods or purports to mix methods. It says it mixes grounded theory, a qualitative approach, with randomized controlled trials, which is definitely a quantitative approach. Actually, I think they are just using sort of a generic qualitative approach that really the grounded theory label may not be the best label for. But they have embedded a strong qualitative component in their randomized controlled trial. And that component served explanatory purposes, so it's a fine example of that. Second thing I want to highlight is their purpose statement or features of their purpose statement. They use some language here that is characteristic of people who demonstrate knowledge of mixed methods. They're identifying the timing, which is meaning sequential. In this case, it's 2 phases. The quantitative phase occurred first, and then the qualitative phase occurred second. Explanatory mixed methods is just that. It means the quant phase was first, explanatory, the qual phase was second. If we move on to the next page of this, sort of an extension of the purpose statement, the authors highlight what I'm saying is the third feature that is exemplary, and that is they give an explicit reason for using mixed methods research. When people do that, they generally embed it in a publication by Green, Caricelli, and Graham from 1989 that identifies different purposes of mixed methods research. This one fits what they would call a complementarity design because they talk about how they use the qualitative findings to enhance initial quantitative results. So the word enhance, add depth, add comprehensiveness is consistent with that complementarity purpose. This particular article uses the qual and quant in a classic way. The quant results probably left the researchers a bit perplexed. And then they use the qualitative results to answer the why question. That's a classic combination. So the quantitative results revealed sort of a counterintuitive finding. that the more severe the injuries, the less likely the person in the emergency room was to identify the injuries as being the result of domestic violence or partner violence, rather than to say it was simply an accident. They used the qualitative approach, follow up sets of interviews, to try to understand why that was the case, and came to the conclusion from the qualitative data that participants, the more severe the injuries, the more the participants feared the judgment of the caregivers in the emergency room, and thus were more reluctant to reveal the cause of their injuries. So, classic combination. If we move on down to the next page, I want to highlight a fourth feature of this article, and that is the use of a figure to depict the phases of the research, the phases of the data collection, and in this case, the analysis. In this case, they're quite distinct. So in the first phase, the quant data were collected and analyzed. In the second phase, the qual data were collected and analyzed, but the two phases were linked. So the use of a figure to help the reader understand a multi-phase project is really something that's highly recommended in mixed methods research. I want to move now to page 7 and actually highlight this part of page 7. We're in the results section of the article, and one of the things that's exemplary about this article is the use of a heading and explicit statements about how the mixing of the qualitative and quantitative strands was executed. So the inclusion of a separate section, explicit description of what was how the two were mixed, is really an important and actually quite rare feature. The next thing I want to highlight is the actual presence of something labeled a mixing table. This says the mixing of the qualitative and quantitative data. In this case, they're not talking about mixing during analysis, but they're talking about mixing during the data collection phase, in that after the quantitative data were analyzed, the results and conclusions for that were used to structure the interview questions in the qualitative portion of the study. And that's what this particular table is highlighting. If we move now to the discussion and conclusion section, I want to highlight one example of what I refer to as value-added statements. These are sprinkled throughout this discussion section, and this is where the authors are explicit about the insight that was gained by combining the qualitative and the quantitative strands. In this case, it was the addition of the explanation for why that came from the qualitative. The final thing I want to highlight is the reference list. Many rubrics for quality include something called the foundational quality, and part of the way that is reflected is by who and what is cited. So in mixed methods research, researchers are compelled to demonstrate their expertise or their competence both to conduct the qualitative, the quantitative, and the mixed method part of their research. One way you do this is by citing the methodological literature from all those three transitions. These authors have done a super job of that. You see that they're citing some of the big names in mixed methods research. I've circled some of those. But you'll also see that they have equal attention, almost equal attention to qualitative methodological articles and quantitative methodological articles. So to summarize, I've identified 7 features of this publication that I think are exemplary in order to help you construct your own publications. So those were: 1, referring to the research as mixed methods in the title; 2, in the purpose statement, establishing the timing and priority of the study by using standard language, concurrent or sequential, explanatory, exploratory designs; 3, being very explicit about the reasons for opting for a mixed methods approach; 4, using a figure that depicts the phases of data collection and data analysis, and those figures are particularly valuable when they show where mixing occurs. 5, being very explicit about the value added statements that talk about what was learned from the qual, what was learned from the quant, and what was gained by mixing. And lastly, the inclusion of methodological references in the reference list that allow the authors to add credibility to the work by demonstrating their methodological as well as their content expertise.